Let's get tapping. Hey there, there's a lot of ambient noises out here today, so hopefully you can hear me. There is also an occasional breeze, but I think my newer phone is better at blocking those out. We'll see. Anyways, I am out here because it is sugaring season, which means I need to tap these maple trees. Now, usually I think tapping them a little bit earlier than this is, you know, the common choice. The nature center around here has already tapped theirs, but it's been super cold, like single digits, and ain't no sap flowing when it's that cold out, so it has not been done yet. And of course before that we had like a foot of snow, so now seems to be a good time for me because today it's about 40 degrees, which compared to what we've had is really warm. And the sun's shining nice and beautiful out, and all this week is supposed to be above freezing during the day, below freezing at night, which is ideal temperatures for tapping and sugaring. So I'm going to be tapping these two great big red maples here, and then I got a couple of sugar maples back behind the goat barn. They're definitely harder to get to back there, but we've tapped them before, we'll do it again. Anyways, I have a few extra taps left over from years past. Most of them of the old ones I end up throwing away because we got some really warm days and they just got moldy, and so I just threw them all away. These ones have not been used, so I do have these ones that I can still use. They have the plastic spile on them, which I don't love. I haven't had one break, but I'm always afraid they will. And obviously you can't see inside to know if they're clean very well. Very tiny opening and all that. So I have them, so I'll use them. But I also this year ordered some new ones. This was a set off of Amazon. I can link it below. And it actually has metal spiles, which obviously a lot tougher than plastic. They also have a lot larger hole there, so you can see inside, make sure it's clean. It even came with a cleaning brush in here for cleaning them out, which is nice. It also came with a drill bit, so no guessing on what size bit you need to make your holes. And then of course a roll of tubing, which, and I'm thinking about it, probably ought to get some thing to cut this with. Yeah, so I'm going to be using these as well this year, and we'll see which ones we like better. I really don't like cleaning these tubes. It's very difficult, and then it's like impossible to get all of the water out after, and yeah, they're just kind of a pain. So, but you can order just a big roll of it like this to replace it year after year, so I may just end up doing that because, like I said, they're very hard to clean. So we'll see, but this is what we're going to be using. In years past I've used 5-gallon buckets. This year I decided to try some 2-gallon buckets. Just those 5-gallon buckets get really heavy, especially when you're carrying them from behind the goat barn and going all the way around the fence with them. So I'm going to try some 2 gallons this year. I don't know, we'll see how it works, see which I like better. Plus, most of my 5-gallon buckets have been reused for other things at this point. So, we'll see. Obviously, we'll have to come out maybe possibly more often, although usually the 5 gallons are only half full when I empty them. So, we'll see. And there's that wind. That usually is our biggest issue because it blows the buckets away until they get enough sap in them to hold them down. All right. Let's get tapping. These are pretty big trees, so I'm going to put 3 taps on each of these. The ones in the back are smaller, so we won't put as many. I'm wondering how tricky it is going to be to get this tubing on. Not bad. Once I have my taps set and my buckets pretty well leveled, sometimes it takes some finagling. The ground isn't usually flat right next to a tree, but then I usually like to put a piece of concrete or a heavy rock or something on top just to help prevent it from blowing away until it gets a chance to get enough sap in there to weigh it down. And we just check on them every day, every other day, just to see what the sap levels are getting at in the bucket, and then when we have enough, we start cooking it down. I don't have a big evaporator. I just have a propane tank and a big 5-gallon stock pot. So I tend to do small batches instead of a whole bunch at once. I know some people even will even with the stock pot, they will just, once it gets halfway down, they'll add extra, add more. That way they're doing larger quantities at a time, but that does take a lot longer to cook down when you keep adding to it, so it becomes like an all-day thing. So I haven't tried doing it that way yet. Maybe I will if we continue to get a good flow. At this point, we've got our sap strained and in the bucket, and we're just gonna let it do its thing, let it boil away throughout the day. Keep an eye on the flame. If it's windy out, that can sometimes blow out, but for the most part, just keep it going. You want a nice rolling boil so that all that extra water can evaporate it, leaving behind the syrup. It's a bit of a long process, but it is mostly hands-off. I have it set here so that I can see it from my kitchen window. That way I don't have to come out constantly to check it. I can just peek through the window, which is really handy. But until the level starts getting quite low, we don't really need to tend it too closely. Now, a little bit of science here. The boiling point of water is about 212 degrees Fahrenheit, which is what this is going to stay at for most of the day, as that sap is mostly water. So it's going to continue to boil and release a lot of steam. A lot of that liquid is going to evaporate during this time. Now, as that extra water evaporates, the sugars in here are going to get more and more concentrated, which means as the level of sap in your stock pot gets lower and the color starts to get darker and the sugars start getting more and more concentrated, you're going to want to start watching it a little bit closer. Because what's going to happen is that temperature is actually going to start rising above the boiling point. And the magic number that we're looking for is 219 degrees Fahrenheit. Once your sap has reached that point, you know you have reached the syruping stage and it is ready to go. When the sap level does get quite low, especially with all of this steam going on, it can be a little tricky to monitor and to see it through the steam and to get your thermometer in there. So once it does get quite low, you can, if you'd like, transfer it to a smaller pot and bring it into the house to finish up that last little bit of cooking down. However, you don't want to do the whole process in your house. While all of this is evaporating, a lot of sugars are being released as well. And not only will that make your kitchen extremely sticky, but you'll also be breathing in that sugar all day and absorbing it through your pores. That'll make you pretty sick. So you don't want to do this whole process inside. But just that last few minutes of trying to get it right to just at the right temperature, you can pour it into a smaller pot and bring it inside for that, so you can keep an eye on it easier. Now, once you do reach that syrup temperature, 219 degrees, it's time for you to bottle it, can it, however you want to store it so that you can use it throughout the year. At this point, if you'd like, you can strain it once again to remove what's called the maple sand. Basically what that is just crystallized sugar. And, you know, that's just sediments from the sap itself that naturally occur during the cooking process. They won't hurt you, but if you do want that beautiful crystal clear syrup like you would see at a grocery store, this would be the time to strain out those maple sands before you bottle them. And that straining process does take a little bit longer because at this point it's syrup, not sap. It's a lot less water, a lot thicker. So because it takes a little while for it to filter, it also has a chance to cool down some. So if you're wanting to go directly into bottling and sealing, you may need to warm it up a little bit more after you have filtered it out. For me personally, I don't mind leaving the maple sand in there, so I just put it straight into jars, put the lids on, let it sit on the counter overnight, and they self-seal because that liquid is so hot. And because of the high sugar content and the high temperatures going into the jars, I feel comfortable doing this with my family, but do your own research and decide if you feel comfortable doing that or if you would rather water bath can them. That's really up to you and how you choose to do it. There are, other ways that you could store it as well. That's just what we do in our family. So how much sap do you need to make syrup? I personally do a batch every time I get 5 gallons of sap. It varies how much syrup is yielded from that. But a good rule of thumb is that it takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. So it takes quite a bit to get a decent amount, but you'll find it adds up pretty quickly. We have already cooked down, I think, close to 30 gallons, and we have, I think, 18 half-pint jars full right now, if I'm remembering correctly. So we're getting a pretty decent turnaround this year. It does vary slightly based on just the year and the weather. I know one year we had a really, really wet winter, tons and tons of rain, which really watered down the sap a lot. So we needed a much larger amount of sap to get a smaller amount of syrup. But a good rule of thumb is about 40 gallons of sap to 1 gallon of syrup. One last little tip here, when to stop tapping, when to pull your spiles, clean everything up and be done for the year. Well, as the spring starts approaching and days get warmer and warmer, the trees will naturally start to heal up those holes that you drilled, and the sap flow will dry up. However, you also want to keep an eye out for if the tree starts to bud, which sometimes can happen a little bit earlier than expected in the season. But when that does start to happen, the flavor of the sap will change, and it may not be quite as delicious and palatable as you would like. So if the tree starts budding, it might be a good time to pull your spiles. I hope you've enjoyed this video about tapping the maple trees and turning all that lovely sap into maple syrup. If you have any maple trees on your property, go and tap those things. It's still pretty early in the season for a lot of places, especially if you're anywhere north of us. Take advantage of that. You know, it doesn't take a lot of equipment, not a lot of startup costs, and you'll be getting more off of your land. That's a wonderful thing. And if you don't know where your maple trees are, then this summer I highly recommend you mark those trees while they still have leaves and everything, so you know which ones they are, so that next year you can tap into those resources. Well, it's been great sharing this with you. I hope your winter is going great. We'll see you next week.